Thank you, and welcome, and thank you again for your time. Without further ado, I would like to introduce to you the Borough President, Eric Adams.
Thank you, Abe, and thank all of you coming out from various houses of worship as we engage in a conversation with the police commissioner. The Deputy Borough President and I just really want to extend a greeting here, as we always state that this house is your house and feel comfortable in the house. And I want to thank all of our commanding officers who are here. I don't think there's no greater impact on the quality of life of a city than the law enforcement community. It is the prerequisite to prosperity, as I always state, and we must do everything that we could possibly do to create the symbiotic relationship between law enforcement and the communities that they serve. We've taken a giant leap forward over the years, and we need to continue that evolution of policing and protecting the rights of everyday citizens. And I believe that we can continue to do so together. And so we have just a few questions, Commissioner, we want to open with, and then we'll take a few from the audience as well, just to give an overview. I think that's what's fresh on all of our minds, and I just realized that, and I took a note of it, is the coronavirus issue. If you can just give an overview on that, and where we are and what to expect in the area of law enforcement around the coronavirus?
I can jump right in. I just spent the last 3.5 hours with the mayor and every city agency. We were doing a tabletop regarding the coronavirus. So right now in New York, there is one confirmed case of coronavirus. It's a person who had traveled to Iran, back to the city. It's a physician. The other case that they are testing right now is that person's husband. They expect that later today to probably come back as being positive. That would give you 2 cases in New York, but it's contained to them. They were physicians, they came back, they kind of self-isolated. On Saturday, she started getting symptoms, went to the hospital, was tested, and on Monday it came back as being positive. When you look at the idea of coronavirus, it is similar to the precautions you need to do is the same precautions you have to do for the typical flu. Wash your hands. Buy a lot of that bacteria stuff to wipe your hands with. Everything that you would do when you have trying to prevent yourself from getting the flu is the same thing you would have to do with the coronavirus. If you cough, sneeze into your elbow, it is not something right now that we expect to continue to grow, but there's plans. We look at every contingency, every possible problem. Our cops have been given materials. There's more than enough masks, gloves to go around. At this point, we are not utilizing them. There's absolutely no reason for people to be walking around going crazy to buy these masks. We have them in stock if necessary. Health and Hospitals is on board. They know what to do. The city has just established their own testing procedures. So New York is the only city in the country right now, if there's a potential that it's a coronavirus, that our health and hospitals can test it right away themselves. We don't have to send it down to the feds to test, and the turnaround is around 3 to 4 hours. The message to get out to your congregants, if you're feeling sick, go to a doctor. You don't have to run to a hospital. Let's not overload the hospitals. Go to your physician, go to a clinic, go somewhere if you're feeling sick to get treated. Chances are it's only going to be the flu. It's been a very bad flu season, but this is something that just to make sure, get yourself checked, and everything will be sent out, and we'll be able to know if there's any uptick in the virus.
I'm pretty sure there may be some questions coming from the floor around that as well, and we'll answer as it comes. Commissioner, can you give us an overview on just the community policing plan that's in place? And I know there was an announcement around the youth and young people. What's the goals in that area?
Thank you, and I just got to thank you, Mr. Borough President. Thank you for the invitation for the whole leadership team to come here tonight and just spread the word of what we're doing in New York City in 2020. If you look at the work that's been done the last couple of years between, I see Fausto Picciotto to my right, Nilda Hoffman, Ben Tucker, Rodney Harrison, who's not here, and Terry Monahan. We've changed how we police New York City the last couple of years in terms of neighborhood policing. We've been able to, and we're pretty proud of it, do two things at once: drive crime down and do it without putting large numbers of people in jail, with a softer touch. That's been what we're probably most proud of, and we've done it by introducing neighborhood policing in all 77 precincts of this city. It's all about building relationships, it's about building trust, it's about making people realize that we are not here to police neighborhoods, we are here to be your police, and there's a big difference to that. In terms of the youth strategy, I think of it as the next evolution. It's doubling down on neighborhood policing, putting more resources towards where they're needed most, and that's with the kids of this city. And if you liken it to an investment, I know the stock market is pretty bumpy the last couple of weeks, but if you have the kids of this city, I can't think of anywhere where it's a better idea to put our resources behind in terms of resources, time, and money. And that's exactly what we're going to do. The goal here is pretty simple: to make sure that we're doing everything possible for kids in every neighborhood of New York City as humanly possible. Can we get kids that might get into trouble and steer them out of trouble before they ever get into trouble? So it's working with Nilda Hoffman and her Explorers. It's working with the Dept program. You'll like in this, Mr. Borough President, you know CompStat. And if you pick an area of New York City and you draw a circle around it, we know exactly what crime takes place in that neighborhood. We do. We're very good at suppressing crime. What we have to do better than ever before is draw that same circle and what services are available for kids in that part of the city. And we don't always know that. So that's where we're looking to be, in many ways, like a quarterback for the entire city. That this work is already going on. We're looking to get deeper into it, whether it's private organizations, whether it's businesses that are providing internships, whether it's our new youth coordination officers that want to work closer than ever before with kids. So I think it's an exciting time. It's a lot of work, but we're up for the task.
Any connection with the Cure Violence and the violence, the whole Cure Violence model? I know there's some things that you're doing.
With the kids specifically?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we're looking to bring everyone on board in terms of the kids. I mean, we have Cure Violence models in many parts of the city already, but I liken, when I think about what we're trying to do with kids, I would divide it into three categories. A very, very small segment of the kids are getting into some pretty serious trouble. We have to recognize that, and we have to deal with that. But that is probably less than 1%. That's a fraction of the kids of this city. Then there's a bigger percentage, but it's still not the majority, of kids that do kid things. They hang out in parks, they hang out with their friends, they get caught up in dumb stuff. We can do a better job of connecting to parents, making sure that they are aware of all the services that are available. We didn't talk about the PALs, but we're talking about many things that can be done. And then there's the vast majority of kids that never get into trouble, but we want to make sure that they stay that way. And what can we do differently there in various neighborhoods of this city, in terms of sports, in terms of after, we have 137 Penn that Nilda can talk about in a minute, where we have tutoring, we have classrooms, we have computer labs, we have a gym in that facility, all run by community affairs cops, many who I see here. So there's a lot of exciting things. When you mentioned the Cure Violence piece, we're not down that road in terms of how they're going to integrate into this. They're certainly going to integrate into that tiny portion, but if we can expand that, we'll look to do that as well.
Just if I could add, as the YCO gets rolled out, they're going to be going into training on March 9th through the 20th, so they're going to be training for 10 days. Then they're going to be going out to their precincts. What we ask from the clergy members here is space. We have 127 Penn, an NYPD community. If you haven't stopped by in East New York, it's beautiful. But there's plenty of places. You might have a location, a house of worship, that you might have a basement that maybe you could open up for that YCO to run a program in there. Maybe you could run a program. Maybe there's a young person that we're unable to get to, and maybe we could refer them to someone in your in your house of worship congregation, that could maybe assist them. And so there's going to be a lot of help that we're going to be asking from our clergy members, and we're going to bring you to the table to assist us in this.
And the YCO's youth coordinating? Okay.
So their youth coordination offices, as the commissioner stated, is modeled after the NCO. So and they're going to be reporting to the NCO. So it's just going to be extra offices out there that they're going to do everything when it involves around youth. So they're going to be kind of the encyclopedia, we call it. So anything in that community, if they work in whatever precinct they work with, their job is going to be able to know kind of everywhere that they could probably refer a young person to, know every CBO that's out there, know every church that's out there, to be able to refer this young person to.
Excellent, excellent. Another item that really has been on the forefront, hate crimes. Where are we? What's going on? Have we seen an increase, or what's the overall perspective on it?
So this was well publicized last year, citywide, and particularly right here in Brooklyn with hate crimes. We saw a pretty significant increase last year. Off the top of my head, I think it was about 20% in hate crimes, but we can certainly get you the actual numbers, but I think it was about 20%. The vast majority of the hate crimes that we see committed in New York City, over 50%, is anti-Semitic in nature. And when you drill down on that, the anti-Semitic crimes that we see overwhelmingly, almost 75%, are property damage where they're drawing generally swastikas. That's what we've seen. The good news is, as we roll into 2020, we've started to see those numbers come down. So that is positive. There's a lot of things that are going on here. I think it's incumbent upon, the question that we get often is why is it happening? And I don't think that's necessarily a simple question. I think that there's no shortage of hate. If you turn on the internet or you turn on the TV and you see a lot of people fighting with each other, and that seems to be the common theme these days. But this really rocked us in November and December when you look at the two incidents, especially on the heels of other incidents in other parts of the country. And now very, very close to home here when we saw what happened in Jersey City, when we saw what happened just a couple weeks later in Muncie. And where did we catch the perpetrator? Immediately after it happened from the Muncie incident, coming right back into New York City. So tremendous job by New York City police officers working that night to get that dangerous person off the street as quickly as possible. But that's what we're seeing primarily across New York City. I think it's incumbent, and we're going to need everyone to join in this fight. I think we were together right after those incidents when we gave a similar speech at a location in Brooklyn where everyone needs to speak out about hate. Everyone needs to speak out and address ignorance when they see it, I think, whether it's kids in a school and showing them the impact of their words or their actions, sometimes that them doing things, or it's at times we've seen mental illness also creep up, where sometimes people doing these things and it is somebody that suffers from mental illness. If it was one or the other, or a career criminal, it might be easy to combat. What we've seen is we've seen a little of all of those things. And I know that the mayor's office has stood up a office to combat hate crime with Deborah Lauder, who's done a very good job in a short period of time, really trying to educate, work into the school curriculum, hate speech, so that people come into the schools now and talk to the kids about the implications of their actions, and that it's more than words, and they're teaching things such as the Holocaust and things of that nature. So I think it's a long road here, but we have, within the NYPD, we have the largest hate crimes task force in the country. And we've also stood up a new unit called the REMI unit, which is extremism-based. There's roughly 25 people assigned to each of those units. And one is proactive and one is reactive. If somebody does something, if somebody robs somebody, whether it's against your religion or your ethnicity or your sexual orientation, or assaults that person, we'll have the hate crimes task force detectives investigate that crime, try to apprehend the person responsible, and bring them to, in this case, Eric Gonzales in the King County DA's office, where they'll face justice for that crime. The newer of the two units is the REMI unit. And this is a unit that really takes a look at hate speech before a crime was committed. And here it gets very technical, because hate speech by its own is protected speech, unfortunately. So you really have to be careful about suppressing free speech. What they do here is they just monitor, and they do it with the guidance of the court. But the thought process here is we do not want to wait for the next terrible incident to take place if there was warning signs and smoke beforehand. So those two units are coordinating with each other, both working really around the clock in New York City. As I said, the overall numbers are coming down, but it is something that is paramount importance to us in the NYPD. Ben, I don't know if you want to jump in, or Terry, anything to add there?
No, I think you covered it.
Good. Okay, the most recent numbers is down 2% in New York City for this year. So, and the anti-Semitic is down 12%. So it's a road that we're going to be watching closely all year. And again, I think one of the main messages here that doesn't get out enough is, if you're aware of something, you got to report it to the police, because the worst thing that we want to see happen is you see, whether it's anti-black, anti-sexual orientation, anti-Jewish, graffiti, or words or anything else, and you say, you know what, it's not a big deal, I'm not reporting it. If you don't report it, it didn't happen. And if you don't report it, we don't deploy officers there. And if you don't deploy it, we can't put patterns together and work to put resources to combat this thing. So education and reporting is really step one.
Are you finding a lot of the cases we have such a large, diverse population? We have a large LGBTQ community, one of the largest Jewish communities. The numbers are just so large. Are you finding a lot of the cases are happening here in the borough of Brooklyn?
What we see in Brooklyn is anti-Semitism more than anything else. Where we do see anti-sexual orientation, that tends to be in Manhattan. That's historic. We see some anti-African American incidents, and that doesn't tend to be in any one borough. One of these crimes is too much. One is literally too much. And think of the impact, and I know, I'm preaching to the choir here. Think of the impact it has on that person and their family, and as word of it spreads through a community. But when you look at what we see, these types of crimes reported in New York City, there's a significant drop-off in terms of once you get past the anti-Semitism. As I said, over 50% of the overall numbers are those. When you get into all the different categories that we track below that, they're much smaller numbers. But again, one is too many.
Can we go, a conversation that always has a lot of emotions, can we just, I know the numbers, they have decreased around stop, question, and frisk. What are the improvements we're making? What are we doing in that area?
Yeah, thanks for that question, because I think it's important for everyone to hear this and to know, again, where we've come from and where we're headed and continue to head, and what our philosophy is here. If you think back on not too distant past, I mean, I think the peak years were 2010, 2011 for stop, question, and frisk in New York City. And if you look at the numbers that were generated, it was close to 700,000 in 1 year. 680-something thousand was at the peak. I mean, let that sink in. Think of the population of New York City. Think of those numbers in small, confined areas, and think of really who was being stopped, sometimes over and over. When you come out of that time period and 2012, 13, that was when the The Floyd case was ongoing. The result of that case was a federal monitor put over the NYPD. When you look at where we are today, 5 years later, from 2013-14 to 2020 now, we've made a conscious decision to change how we police in this city. And I started off talking about neighborhood policing, but it's a much bigger story than that to me. When you look at the work of the people sitting up here on the dais, as well as the men and women sitting behind me that are really the front lines today leading the police officers in New York City. We've combined precision policing with neighborhood policing, and the results have been pretty darn good. It's allowed us to move from 680-something thousand stops in a year to averaging the last 5 years between 10 and 20,000 stops. Ben, am I correct on those numbers?
Yeah, we're actually lower than the 20,000. We're bound between 13,000, which is where we were at the end of just last year, and the year before that, we were just about 10,000. So uptick about 1,200 or so.
Yeah.
But still very low. I mean, the way to think about it is it's roughly a 97% decrease from what it was in 2011.
So the stops have gone from 680,000 to 10 to 15, 20,000, in that range, 97% drop. The arrests have dropped too. Over 400,000 arrests used to be the norm for a period of time in New York City. It was closer to 200,000 last year. It's almost a 50% drop in the arrests that are affected. And they're down again, pretty significant this year. So that's continuing. The summonses on the street, criminal court summonses where somebody's brought into the station house, dropping significantly. So whether you look at any of those barometers, stops, summonses, arrests, all significantly down in the last 5 years. And here's the amazing part. We've driven shootings, murders, stolen vehicles, robberies, burglaries to all-time lows. All-time lows. We got to periods where we started to count days in New York City without a shooting. We never thought that would happen. And we're sitting up here telling this story. There's a lot of people that could be and should be standing behind us, whether you're talking about all the different prosecutors, all the different federal entities like the DEA, DETF, and things of that nature. You mentioned Cure Violence before. Think about teachers, think about investments put back into communities, think about the clergy. So this isn't a police story. This is a community story that has driven crime down and driven the enforcement touch to the lowest level that we've seen in years. Every week that comes by, either Ben, Terry, or myself get requests of people coming from across the country and knocking on the door of the New York City Police Department and saying, what are you doing? How do you do it? I get that you can knock crime down. It's easy. You suffocate an area. How are you knocking crime down and putting neighborhood policing into play, where you're not arresting thousands and thousands and thousands of people? That's the most impressive part. Our civilian complaints over that time period drastically reduced. When you look at our firearms discharges, I don't know, Ben, if you could talk about that. People are shocked how few times officers use weapons in this city.
Sure, you know, it's a stunning story. So just to give you some context for it, in 1972, when actually I was in the police academy at the time, and in 72 we had 954 firearm discharges that year. Now, half of those were adversarials, meaning that the bad guys were either shooting at us or using some other form of deadly physical force against our cops. In fact, that year, some of you will remember we had Greg Foster and Rocco Laurie murdered from the 9th Precinct at that time in January 27th of that year. So since then, the numbers have continued to come down. If I had a chart, I could show you just the tracks all the way down. So that in 2018, we ended the year with 35 firearm discharges, 35, half of which were adversarials, just to give you a sense. And that's pretty stunning. And that is because of some research that was started by a lieutenant back then, who started to take a hard look at firearm discharges, and the focus was on our officers and how many times they fired their weapons and how many rounds they fired, but also how to keep them safe. And so he did his research, and through that research, not only NYPD, but other departments adopted his methods. But it's primarily through training and giving officers the awareness and so forth to really have more self-constraint, to be able to take cover. If you're taking cover, that you're less likely to have to be exposed and therefore to have to fire, but if you can avoid it. So last year we ended with 52 firearm discharges, and again, half of those were adversarials. And so those numbers are the lowest they've ever been. And I think we ended up with many officers being safer as a result, and as a result, fewer shots fired, so it keeps the citizens safe as well.
Thank you. The last is traffic-related incidents. As you know, we saw 2 young people in Brooklyn in a 3-day period, 2 children on their way to school. They were both killed by traffic crashes. And it seems like one of them primarily was connected to speeding, driving fast. Your perspective on how we can partner with the DOT and the community at large on dealing with some of these preventable traffic fatalities and serious injuries.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I mean, nothing, you know, we could talk all day about numbers and crime and statistics, and then you have what we had last week, 2 days apart. We lost 2 little kids walking to school, and all those numbers seem pretty meaningless in a hurry. Let me just tell you the statistics first, and then I'll tell you, because Brooklyn right now needs some help here. And then I'll kick it off and I'll turn it to Fausto in a minute. But so far this year, we've had 13 fatalities. That's up from 8 last year. That's a 62% increase. Spread in, if you try to find particular precincts, there's a number of precincts. The 6-2 has had 4, the 6-6 has had 2, and then the 7-5 with those incidents last week has had 2. A number of precincts have had 1. When you look at the 13 people that we've lost this year in Brooklyn, 10 of them were pedestrians, 1 of them was a bicyclist, 1 of them was riding a motorcycle, and 1 was a passenger. That's the 13. If you look at, when you look at the pedestrians, and there's 10 of them, 6 of them were 60 or over in terms of age, whether that's relevant or not. 2 of them were children, and that was the female that's 10 years old and the male that was 7. And then you really have no common denominator in terms of, was it left turns, right turns, driving safe. The 2 with the children, there were arrests made in those for failure to yield. In one of those, we've had 6 operators arrested for failing to yield, and 1 failed to exercise due care. And you know, when you look at what we're doing, we're taking a look at in terms of kids walking to school. Certainly, Fausto can talk about school crossing guards in a minute, in a moment. But I think it goes beyond that. I think it really takes a holistic approach. Jeff Madri, you here? I'll let Jeff and I'll let Brian jump in a second too, what they do on a day-to-day basis in terms of looking at locations where there are accidents. Who can we partner with? But I will tell you that nothing is off the table here in terms of whether it's school crossing guards, whether it's using our police officers, whether it's partnering with the Board of Ed, DOT, whether it's using auxiliary officers to cover. Because clearly if we have a situation where 2 children lost their life, we have to do better. Those 2 locations were not locations where normally there would be school crossing guards, because although they were close to the school, Fausto, 2 blocks away?
Correct.
That's not locations where we normally had school crossing guards. But I'll let our Chief of Patrol, Fausto Picciotto, speak to it.
Thank you, Commissioner. And really, it's an overlay of a 3-pronged approach, if you will. And part of it, as I look around this room and I look at the thousands of people that everyone in this room respectively can touch at any given moment, any given day of the week at your congregations. Part of that is that education component that will rely on you, certainly, as we do via our social media, via our Build the Block meetings, to tell the public, hey, there's a speed limit, we need to slow down. What other educational aspects can we get together to push out to those in the street? The second part of that is in engineering. So if you walk through your neighborhoods, or if you hear people who say there may be a stop sign that we need at this location, there may be a traffic device, reach out to your neighborhood coordination officers, attend the local district cabinet meeting, the community board meeting, the public safety meeting that our precinct commanders and borough commanders at times that are sitting to my left and behind me, along with the neighborhood coordination officers, attend. And the third piece of that is that enforcement aspect, that sometimes we don't know. The people on the neighborhood know more than anyone else, those that travel to and fro, that work in that neighborhood, that take their kids to school on a daily basis, say, something's going on in this street, on this particular side street. I think cars are speeding. Well, let us know, so then we can focus some of our intention and some of our efforts there. Because as we know, the police department is such a great entity and an organization, but we don't know everything that's going on, and that's why it's so critical to have that partnership with everyone, the 8.6 million New Yorkers in this city. School crossing guards do a tremendous work day in and day out, and they really, really take care of our precious resources, our school kids. But again, we need the folks in this room, the voices across the city, as we push to continue to hire school crossing guards. Right now, we have about 100 vacancies of school crossing guards. So I'll use this forum to plug that in, that you get health benefits, you get decent pay. So if you can get the message out, the NYPD is hiring, not always police officers, and not only police officers and traffic enforcement agents and school safety agents, but school crossing guards as well. So if you can relay some of that information out there, we would be certainly eternally grateful for that.
Thank you. I'm sorry, you want to ask something, Commissioner? First, we should acknowledge Chief Pachado is the new Chief of Patrol, took over for Chief Rodney Harris after his many years in law enforcement experience. Congratulations.
Thank you.
We look to have you here often. Chief, so I want to drill down a little on the school crossing guards, because that was part of the issue that people reached out to our office to talk about. Do we normally try to have a school crossing guard on each post where you do have them? I know you stated that you normally won't have it at this location, but if a school is that shortage of school crossing guards, is that impacting the ability to cover every assignment they would normally cover?
No, it is not at the current time, because whenever, for example, a school crossing guard calls out because they're sick or ill, they have some sort of family emergency, we'll backfill it with, we hired a 100 school crossing guard supervisors throughout the whole city, and in particular in the 75th precinct in East New York, they have 3 supervisors. So if a school crossing guard calls out because they have something going on in their personal life, the school crossing guard supervisor will either take that post, will work with the precinct officers and fill in that void. Now the process will work with their educators, our principals, to make sure they work hand in hand with the precinct commanding officers to determine what locations will necessitate the post. And more often than not, it's usually that radius of right off a block or by the school, to make sure that that corridor, and they take into consideration working with them, where do most of the kids come to from school? And that's why they identified those school crossing guard posts throughout the city.
So if we could do an analysis, because that was some of the calls we received, that oftentimes parents are stating that they are not seeing a school crossing guard, and maybe they're not aware of where the school crossing guards are actually supposed to be. And if we can even assist, maybe something that our office can partner on to determine what the best route for parents to allow their children to go to and from school where they will have school crossing guards.
Yeah, we'll take that ownership and make sure that through the principal or the local PTA and every member in the community, that everyone has some awareness of those specific posts and where they're covered, so everyone can know what posts are covered.
Appreciate that. So we just want to take an opportunity. We are in Brooklyn, to have Brooklyn North, Brooklyn South commanders, if you could just give an overview, from Brooklyn North, Brooklyn South.
Okay, is Brooklyn North's going first? Okay. We are the host borough. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Just really quick, just a brief overview of Brooklyn North. Brooklyn North, we have 10 commands, cover roughly about 25 square miles of territory, and many neighborhoods from East New York to Greenpoint. I know a lot of you in the room, so a lot of you are familiar with your commanding officers and a lot of the things that we do in Brooklyn North to try and do community outreach and stuff. Last year, we were down in crime. We had a successful crime campaign. We were down in crime. This year, we're off to a little bit of a rough start, but, Brooklyn North, we always adjust and do what we have to do, work with our communities, work closely with our community partners, our clergy, our business, and our elected leaders to, do what's best for this borough and figure out, again, how to bring down crime while continuously building community relations. And that's what we'll continue to do. That's how we'll continue to work with our communities. A lot of you in this room, you come to our council meetings, our clergy meetings. What I just encourage you to do is to continue to come to the meetings, continue to bring more people out, so that way we can continue to learn from you and build our partnerships up even more so we can continue to fight crime and continue to just work with our communities and celebrate the values of each and every one of our communities here in Brooklyn North. Thank you.
Brooklyn South?
Good afternoon. Assistant Chief Brian Conroy. I'll just stick with the traffic accidents because this is a very serious issue for us, and we see some of these tragedies. They're even difficult on our officers who respond to the scene of some of these incidents and see a young child that in a horrific accident or an individual who's seriously hurt in an accident. So this has an effect on all of us, and we are diligently working to, and basically we don't see it's not a commonality. We can say, hey, this is the one thing that's causing this. For example, like a left turn, we kind of think, hey, that left turn, the pedestrian cross is a dangerous situation, but that's not, but we've seen a lot of different reasons for it. We just lost one of our officers off duty, died this week as a result of a car accident on the way home, where he was T-boned at an intersection by a speeding driver. So this affects us all. So, we all need to work together. I think as the Commissioner mentioned, we need to work together, Chief Fausto mentioned, to sort of get this under control. And probably the biggest thing we want to look at is the speed and how fast people are driving and not paying attention. All right, so I think that's all we need to work together with. And we look forward to working with you to try to certainly reduce the number of this, because it's tragic all around. The poor family who somebody goes out and doesn't come back because they got hit crossing the street. All right, so this is difficult for everyone. So we want to work together to not only just reduce crime in general, and that's our certainly main mission, is to keep people safe, but also keep people safe while they're crossing the street or riding a bicycle or driving their car. So thank you very much. We look forward to working together with everyone. Thank you.
Okay, we'll take a few questions if there are any from the floor. Yes, you could use the mic here, or we could bring the mic over. DJ, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
My name is Monika Sinclair. I'm a pastor and a teacher, and I am going to speak. There are several issues, but the traffic situation is on the tip of my tongue and in my heart, and it saddens me a lot. I love to walk, so I walk a lot. Just this morning, and I kept thinking all day, what would have happened to those two girls this morning? Their crossing guard was not there. We meet up every morning and evening because we walk to where we're going. So I crossed, and I looked and I saw her coming, and I stayed there and I held the car, just put my hand up. And then when I looked, her sister was not directly behind her. She was about maybe a chain or a little less away. Luckily, it was a patient driver, and he stayed. The others were blowing behind because they were not seeing what's happening up front. So I waited until the sister came up, and she crossed. The big sister was shocked that she was so far behind. I don't know what happened this morning. So when the crossing guards are not there, it's a crisis. When they are there, it is just as bad because drivers are not paying attention. Why is it that drivers, when they see the amber light, it is time to double your speed? If you were going at 30, you double it to 75. Why? We have to look at retraining our drivers. How can the DMV, the DOT, and the police come together to help our community? Our children are suffering. Another thing that causes accident is blocking the crossways. Blocking the crossways. God has been on my side because I talk to them. I've spoken to policemen as well. I go up to them and I say, I talk to regular citizens about blocking the crossway. What do I do with you? Who do I complain when you block the crossways? But something has to be done yesterday to save our lives. I have stopped at crossways and a car stopped in front and somebody speed from behind that car that has already stopped at 100 miles. Had I gone across, I would not be here. So something has to be done from the DMV standpoint with teaching who does the books for the drivers to study. Something has to be done. When you're renewing your license, a questionnaire, a packet, something to encourage us to slow down. I used to drive, I don't drive here, but I used to drive, and my mother used to say to me, the stoplight is going to catch you. And I said, no, it is telling me to prepare to stop. So we have to educate. I've started educating my congregation. Or children, I tell them, I say, respect the vehicles. Wait, sometimes I wait 2 stoplights to change before I cross, because if I can help it, we should not be hit. However, the stoplights with the DMV, there is a stoplight at Buffalo and Bergen. Bergen, where it reaches, is a dead end. The light from the vehicle coming from St. Mark's on Buffalo, when the light there says go, Bergen light says walk. Now it's just a swing, about maybe 15, 20 feet from one stoplight to the next. When I cross there, I cross against the light on Bergen because it's not as busy. I wait for them to go because once they start off, even though they see the light, they are not coming. There was a long time ago, a policeman gave me a card.
Hold on, I want to.
Yes, it's very important.
Yeah, but I just want to be conscious that you have a long line behind you, so.
And it's worth it.
I'm
Let's
sure it
be
is.
seen. The card he gave me, a little card, says be seen. We have to, police officers have to help us. They can't speed and expect other citizens not to speed.
I agree.
We have to teach our people how to be safe on the street. Change, wait for a light to change. So I don't know what you can do, Commissioner, and congratulations. What you can do, read the DMV and the DOT, something has to be done. Crossing guards need to be more there and have more power as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the comment. I'll just say, I agree with everything that you said in terms of more has to be done. When you look at what we do at specific locations, and Jeff Madri, you got that one, I'm assuming, St. Mark's, Buffalo to Bergen, to take a look at that.
Yes, I got it.
But there's a piece of this that's prevention, where we do have our officers, we do have our auxiliary officers out at specific locations. We're not adverse to giving people summonses, but we also want to give people opportunities to self-correct too. So we're handing out literature, be aware. Maybe there's more that we could do in terms of giving them a flyer that says, are you aware that a child died at this location? But we certainly do tell them to slow down and to avoid blocking the box and things of that nature. We also do quite a bit of enforcement. We do enforcement through officers with radar guns. We do speed enforcement through automated cameras that the city has put up more speed cameras, whether it's rumble strips that in areas around schools. So there's certainly things that we could do and will continue to do. I'll follow up with Fausto in terms of specifically, not just around schools, but specifically targeted around schools to make sure that our kids are safe. The one thing that I didn't, and I do appreciate your comments about it's how cautious you are crossing the street. I would just add in too, the common denominator here is trucks, more often than not. When I look at the fatal accidents in Brooklyn this year, 2 were SUVs, I'm sorry, 3. But then you have 2 four-door sedans, but then you have a flatbed truck, a cement truck, a dump truck, an MTA bus, a pickup truck, a school bus, and a carting truck. And that it's incumbent on the trucks to know that the people can't see them. To just, again, speed kills, drive slow. But it's going to take a multi-pronged approach really to keep people safe. A little bit of enforcement, a little bit of knowledge, handing out flyers, things of that nature. If we have to make road improvements, we'll do that as well.
Thank you, President
Thank you.
Adams, and nice meeting you, Commissioner.
Thank
My
you.
name is Reverend Lee ONeill. I'm in the 75th Precinct. I've been so frustrated with our family's 56 years in East New York that I've resorted to writing a letter to the United States Justice Department, who immediately sent my complaints to the FBI. I've met with the district attorney's people twice, once in December, once in October. Upon leaving them, they said to me, somebody's going to jail. I have spoken to my Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, who's advised me to write a letter to the Attorney General. I want to notify your office of the crime and the problems that we're having in East New York. It's related to grand larceny, corruption, impersonation. And I want to let you know that this year I will be armed. I will not walk the streets of New York without a weapon. And I want to know how you feel about pastors being in churches with weapons. I've been on the firing range in Atlanta. I lived in Atlanta for 32 years. But we're having some problems in East New York. And my brother in the 75th, when I call your office and when I come and meet with your people, absolutely nothing happens. Before my problems reach the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and other media, I think it would be nice for me to come and speak to you, Commissioner, and let you know about the crimes that we're experiencing in East New York. Thank you.
Thank you. So I appreciate that, and we'll right afterwards, we'll speak, and I'll connect you to somebody so we can hear out corruption, grand larceny, and things of that nature. And let me just say thank you. In terms of the guns, we're not of the opinion that more guns is the answer here, and whether that's in clergy or other locations. But we will certainly work with you to address your concerns, and if we haven't been responsive enough, then that's a problem, and I apologize.
Good afternoon, Commissioner, and to your staff. My name is Joe Gonzales, and I want to first thank the NYPD on top of a number of sea changes that have occurred, some of which you mentioned earlier in your remarks. There's one other thing that has changed, and I need to say that I'm very impressed by it. Historically, when I interacted with the police, The most I could get to is maybe the street cop or the community affairs cop, if I was lucky, the sergeant. There's a dynamic now, and has been for several years, where bosses, captains, inspectors, and certainly a number of chiefs personally return phone calls and emails and interact. There's no history, at least in my lifetime, of bosses sort of coming down. So I want to really thank you as, you know, the representative of the police department for continuing the change where bosses, high-ranking police officials actually return phone calls and are interacting on a level that I've never seen in my life. As I said, my experience was maybe the community affairs cop or the sergeant. So I want to thank you. I actually know about half of the bosses that are here now, and over time through my activism, I can say that they routinely, including Chief Monahan, returned a call personally. I sent him an email. He immediately contacted me. I addressed him, as he'll tell you, a concern a couple of weeks ago, and he immediately returned my call to me and referred it, and it's being addressed. So that culture change has changed. That culture has changed where bosses are comfortable talking with, you know, the regular citizens. I want to thank you. So that said, the other concern I have is we have an epidemic across the city, particularly here in Brooklyn. It's called real estate fraud. There's a massive epidemic, you certainly know, where homes are being stolen, all types of financial frauds of one type or another. And it's been said literally thousands of people have had their deeds stolen, their homes stolen, and bank accounts taken from them. And we don't see, it would appear, any response or any substantial response from NYPD. Hate crimes, immediate task force. Traffic accidents, immediate task force, and certainly, and those crimes do deserve a police response. But we're witnessing literally thousands of people losing their homes, and it doesn't appear that NYPD has any kind of task force to address that. So I want you to, can you give people some confidence about what is the capacity of, say, a precinct detective if I lose my home and I go into the precinct, or my deed is stolen or something along those lines? How does NYPD deal with that ongoing epidemic? Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up. And for those in attendance, that is a real problem. That is not an imagined, I don't know about thousands, but number one, we need to hear about it. A couple of years ago, we formed a grand larceny division, over 200 detectives in the NYPD. And as part of that grand larceny division, in addition to investigating cybercrime and things of that nature, exactly what you're describing is investigated by the grand larceny division. There's special frauds, there's financial crimes task force. These are not your average crimes. These are crimes that are steeped, if you will, in fraud, sometimes with many layers. And I'll tell you that Eric Gonzales here in Brooklyn has a unit specifically to investigate these crimes. So you would not have a unit to investigate and prosecute these crimes if it was not being addressed. They are well aware of this condition. If you have specific cases that you think weren't handled well, I will absolutely take that and refer it and get back to you in terms of what was done on those specific cases. But it is real. It is the, in many ways, you know, we formed that unit 4 or 5 years ago in response to the changing landscape of crime. And you don't rob a bank. Well, unfortunately, we're starting to see it a little bit more recently, but, you know, I used this line last year, and it was still good last year, where you don't rob a bank with a gun anymore, you rob it with a fake ID and a withdrawal slip. And that's because people are turning, you know, getting craftier and craftier in terms of pickpocket potentially a senior citizen. And then you take the information from that wallet and get a fake ID, and then you give it to a girl that looks close to the description of the senior citizen and walk into a bank and start draining the account. And an evolution of that was then what property is owned and how can they take it to the next level. So we work closely with prosecutors throughout New York City. I can't think of anything that annoys me more than people preying. Oftentimes it is on senior citizens with these things. If you see someone that's home, if you see someone that needs help and you see somebody new around, they may be kind-hearted and taking care of that person, or they may be somebody that's preying on that person. So, you know, this is where this Fausto talked about the relationships. This is where that relationship matters. It's great that you're saying you have relationships with the people sitting up here. We're going to get to where we want to be when you have relationships like that with the frontline cops that are on the street. And you stop that cop and you say, hey, I noticed this a little something doesn't seem right. I'm not sure if it's anything, but somebody's hanging around that particular person. And let us get that information and vet it and see if there really is it a problem, or is it somebody genuinely taking care of that senior citizen? So please pass on any specific cases, but it absolutely is a concern and a priority.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Malika Simmons. Good afternoon to everyone and all the
afternoon.
dignitaries. Commissioner Shea, what's being done to address the mental health needs of the police officers?
I'll jump on that because nothing is closer to my heart than that. A good friend of mine, Steve Silks, took his own life last year, followed by another 7 officers. We've made a lot of changes within our agency, starting with peer counselors. These are people that we're training within the commands themselves. These are police officers that we're giving training to give someone for an officer in need to reach out to within their command. We've currently trained 227 embedded throughout every one of our precincts and all of our units. And I'm talking uniform and civilian members, because we have 19,000 civilians that are just as much danger. We've also started Finest Care. Finest Care is an anonymous call you can make to Columbia Presbyterian. If you're in need, if you're in trouble, if you're having that bad moment, a police officer can pick up a phone, call there, and have an anonymous, completely confidential appointment the next day with a counselor to get help. Because we don't care how an officer gets help. When he's in that crisis, when he's in that moment, we want them to make a reach out. And starting today, we hired a new psychologist, a director. Our psychologists have always been on part of the medical division, always part of the fitness for duty. So there was always a fear to go forward to one of our psychologists because they would be considered, they're going to get my guns taken away if I go. There was always a discipline aspect of it. Well, this psychologist now is working directly for our employee assistance unit. That unit reports directly to the police commissioner. That is now separate and distinct. Someone that police officer can go to, that they can reach out to and get help. Again, it is vital that our cop takes that moment when they're in trouble. And before it gets to that point, realizes there's places they can go to get help and get better, because that's what it's all about. You know, you break your arm, you go to a doctor, you get healed. Well, that's the same thing. You have an emotional distress, you go to a doctor, and you get healed. And that's the message that we're going to be sending out. And you're going to see a lot more coming in the next couple of days, coming forward. This new psychologist that we have will be on the media, and we want to get it internally and externally so people understand what we're doing.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just add to that I'll turn it over to Ben in a second, but you think of the scenario where sometimes our police officers of multiple ranks go out there every day, and if they're doing their job right, which I think overwhelmingly they are, they're out there protecting people and taking care of other people's problems, and the toll that takes on a human being. I mean, this is not a police problem. It doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter what color you are, how much money you have, where you grew up. I think this is something that everyone needs to take a look at, and we take it extremely serious. I mean, it was just a week or two ago that I was at a funeral out in Long Island for a member of our team that took his own life, and nothing hits, as Terry said, closer to home. Ben?
Yeah, I think Terry said it as well. You know, after Steve took his own life on June 5th last year, and then the next day we had one of our detectives take his own life, and then in short order, by the end of the year, we had 7 more suicides. And so we convened the task force, and as Terry suggested, we had a plan of action. There's about a little bit more than a dozen things that we've done to build on a platform we had in place already. that had to do with our chaplains, our employee assistance unit, and so forth. And so we recognized that we didn't, there was more we needed to do. And so we've begun down that path. All of the things that we are trying to do, Terry referenced the peer support system that we're building. We looked at what other agencies were doing, LA, Chicago, and we're not bashful about stealing ideas and using them if we think they can help our officers and our civilians. I mean, you know, this is, by the way, not unique to our officers taking their own lives. But we do, and we will continue to, and we're seeing, as we've gotten rid of the myths and the stigma attached to preventing officers from coming forward. In many cases, they worry about losing their guns. That's a challenge. When we take their guns, we take them because they're necessary and they're not capable, and we're worried about their health and the health of their loved ones or other officers, and so it's sometimes necessary. But we needed to make that clear to our officers, and we changed our policies. We recognize that if when we usually take the officers' guns, we also take their shields. In the past, that was the norm. Someone suggested that maybe, perhaps, it may not be necessary to take the shields. And we changed the policy because it isn't necessary to take the shields. We can still have that officer feel as though, you know, when you become a cop and you have your gun, you have your shield, that's part of who you are as a person. And to the extent that people are under stress, you know, they become, you know, concerned about their well-being and that of their families. So a variety of changes in policy. That's just one example, but also the idea that we are, through our medical division staff and our chaplains unit and our employee relations unit, and some other entities out there, going to great lengths to ensure that our officers are taking advantage of the services, and we know that they are, in fact. And so the challenge, however, is the experts tell us if an officer is committed to taking his or her own life, then you know, chances are that that may be the end result. We recognize that we need to have resources available well in advance so that officers can take advantage. And we're looking at not just mental health, but also physical health. If you're in good shape and you're feeling well and you're eating properly, those kinds of things matter as well. So, you know, we're looking at the larger picture and a wider spectrum on what's necessary to do, and we're doing all of those things, all with a view toward taking care of our officers, making sure they're fit for duty, and as a result, we hope that they won't ever get to the point where they're that hopeless and they feel as though they need to take their own lives.
Thank you.
President Adams, Chaplain Martin, Commissioner Shea, Tucker, thank you for having this. This is a great event, and I'm glad to be here. My name is Reverend Mark Taylor. I'm the pastor of a church in downtown Brooklyn. Sits in the middle of 3 housing developments. And generally, I've had excellent service and excellent connections with the police department, but not always. Where I haven't, it's been because I thought people didn't understand the culture, they didn't understand the community. One of the things that I think could happen, and perhaps needs to happen, is that the department needs to take advantage of clergy in the community who are willing to do more than just, you know, say hello and just wave at you and give you a cup of coffee. In the issue of mental health, I want an officer in my community to know if he's down and he needs somebody to talk to, he can come in my church and talk to me. I want it to be anonymous. I want him to know I will support him. And I want the department to know that I'm trained to do that, been doing it almost 30 years. I think we're not taking advantage of that. And I think that's part of a general problem that I see with officers being trained. I wouldn't want any officer to come in my community without understanding black people, without understanding some of the uglier parts of American history, without understanding police and community relations. And the excellent work that I've had from Chief Madden all the way down to the street cop has been when people had that understanding. And so I've also had excellent response in the 84 and the 88. But I think we need to do more. I think you need to take advantage of capable clergy in the police academy. Don't wait till you put a cop on the street in my neighborhood for something to happen. Let me come into the academy. Let other people who come into the academy who can talk about the community. And the greatest example of this in my 30 years was when Amadou Diallo was shot. The department had a gigantic training session, and we had a couple of talks with officers in a precinct in Williamsburg, I believe. That was the greatest conversation I ever had with the police. I thought a police officer was going to shoot me in one of them, okay? But he said his truth, and I said my truth. We don't have enough of those kind of exchanges. And I think it's a further step in community relations if we want to resolve some things and do more than just react. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Well said.
Reverend
Well
Taylor,
said.
thank you very much for the comments. I'll just say that I've been around to a number of churches in my short time as police commissioner, and many before, certainly, but I'm always struck with just what you said. There's got to be something that we can do more. You know, when you speak about kids, I laugh because I think I see Tariq in the back there, and Tariq and I talked about this. We went to a church in Queens, and I'm talking about helping kids, and I don't have to build anything. They got it built already. They have the system, and we can learn. I always leave saying we can learn a lot from the clergy, and I agree with you. I think we do a lot already. I don't think we're maximizing everything that we could be potentially doing. In terms of bringing the clergy together with our officers earlier and earlier, we do a lot now. I don't know, as I sit here, whether we have clergy come into the police academy. I don't think so, Terry. I don't know if you know that. We do upon graduation from the academy, definitely, and before they hit the streets. And then we invite the clergy to come in and speak at roll calls and be a community partner. But there's absolutely more that we could do, and I think the sky's the limit. Nilda, is anything you want to add to that, or Fausto?
I mean, what I wanted to add was that this could be done at the local level. You, as a clergy member, could go to your local precinct, housing development, and speak to the commanding officer, and that's where the relationship needs to be built there, and come in, and absolutely, I'm sure that these commanding officers are not going to have no problems for you to come in, speak to their officers. You know, there's 3 tours, come on any tours. I know you guys work like us 24 hours a day, and please come and, you know, and speak to our officers.
I'm told that some chaplains do go into the academy, so that's a good idea, and I'm glad we're already taking advantage of that. And you know, we talked at length earlier about.
Yeah, you have a lot of clergy who are teachers. Myself, before I came to the parish, I was a teacher in Nebraska. So you got a lot of people with college degrees, and they're ready to come to the academy. I've also been to the precinct. I had a great time.
That's great. That's great.
I think the combination of those things.
Reverend Taylor, I just signed you up to do my orientation for I got your number. Give you a call. You know what? I do my orientation for my new cops every about a month they come out. A couple of people here have spoken at my orientations, so I'm gonna definitely put you on the list. I'll be reaching out to you. Come share, you know, give us your wisdom. I know who you are. We've talked. You'll be great. You'll be. No, it is great reasons. Absolutely. Listen. It's great reasons. I know who you are. You are in the downtown Brooklyn Farragut community. You are a legend. Everyone knows that. And I'm glad you want to come out and help us. I'm signing you up for my orientation in about a month and a half when my new group comes out, and I'll sign you up for a few more.
And feel free to grab Nilda at the break, because we don't have all the answers on kids, you know, but we do, unfortunately, day in and day out. We're responding to houses, apartments, where kids are in crisis, and kids fighting with their mothers, or sometimes a mother or grandmother saying, I don't know what to do with this kid. So anything that we could do partnering up in terms of, maybe tomorrow it's not the cop that needs to speak to the clergy. Maybe it's a child, or maybe there's a basement that's not being used fully where we can have kids at least with a safe place to meet so they're not on a street corner. So, you know, we can continue that conversation as well. Thank you.
Yes, good evening.
Good evening.
God is good, and all the time. My name is Reverend Terry Lee, and certainly Mr. Borough President, Commissioner Shea, and to all the executive chiefs and officers. I don't really have a question today, sir, but I'm here, and when I look at the panel and I looked around the room, I can truly say you have one of the best team working for you. And what I am asking us as clergy and leaders to do, just to put your hands together and let us give a big thank you to the NYPD. They are the best and the best and the best in this whole wide world. Thank you. God bless you. Keep up the good work.
We should end it right there.
Thank you, Mr. BP.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I'm Joe Dweck. I'm a liaison at the 7L. A couple of points. One is, one of my pet peeves is drivers who pass school buses. Technologically, there must be something, President Adams, that while we're putting cameras on new and regular buses for parking, can't we do something about these SOBs that are putting the children in real danger?
It's a good question, and it's something that my staff is looking at to see if we can do that. We've heard that that suggestion came to us, and I think it's a good idea.
Also, from your initiative of getting together about hate, we're trying to put together films with NYPD for schools and maybe for public access to break down some of the hate so that we can get into schools and then to address it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
President Adams, thank you for the gathering. Commissioner Shea, congratulations on your appointment. It's good to see Benjamin Tucker, Captain Madri. They do a terrific job. My concern has to do with the relationship between the force and the unions. Unfortunately, when there are cases of excessive force or deadly force, there's a knee-jerk reaction from some of the unions. And I don't think the specific voice of the PBA and other unions speaks for all members of the force. There may not be an answer today, but we may want to give thought to how the force responds when the PBA or other unions give that knee-jerk reaction when the community knows that there are some police officers that act out of hand, which does not do well to build the trust between the community and the NYPD, which I think is very important.
Yeah, I think you speak very wisely there. I think that when you look at incidents, I mean, you have to separate the police department and an official spokesperson, and that would be myself, that would be Terry, that would be Ben Tucker. When an incident happens, I think it's imperative that we stand up, good or bad, and we own the incident, and we speak what we can lawfully, you know, about the particular situation, but be as transparent as possible, and that's how you build trust. There is going to be other statements made, but I think it's important for people to realize, you know, we've made a conscious effort in terms of when you look at body cameras. We've started putting out footage within a month now of critical incidents. I'm not afraid to say something's wrong if I think it's wrong, either way. But I think it's important that we as leaders and really representatives, I've said this a number of times, I consider myself extremely lucky to be sitting in this position. But I don't view myself as the police commissioner of 36,000 cops and 55,000 members of the NYPD. I view myself as the police commissioner of 8.6 million people. And that's how I approach today. So I agree with you.
And let me just add something to that, because I'm glad you raised the point. But you know, we recognize that's important. That the unions are the unions, and I've said that to the unions at an earlier meeting a couple of years back. To your point, which, you know, really I suggested that they should be careful about getting out ahead of the investigations and so forth, because the public, when they're speaking, the public doesn't make a distinction between labor and management, right? And so, and it's particularly, and the reason I said it was out of frustration in many ways, because it had to do with the fact that we are bending over backwards to push neighborhood policing and rebuild the trust that was damaged in the past. And so, you know, I've delivered that message once. It fell on deaf ears. But just so you know, it's not something that was lost on the leadership of this agency.
Reverend Chloe Breyer at the Interfaith Center of New York, up in Harlem, and also with St. Philip's Episcopal Church and the CAC. Just on that question of trust, thank you so much for bringing that up. I had taken part in a recent hearing in City Council about the use of force with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. The hearing took place on Friday, and what was startling was the consistency with which immigration lawyers, activists, and also family members described Immigration and Customs Enforcement coming to their doors and claiming to be the police and wearing uniforms that said police on them. And I wouldn't have known had I not seen those myself earlier in the week. My concern is that if Immigration and Customs Enforcement is using the identity and the reputation of the New York Police Department in order to gain access to many of our fellow New Yorkers, what is that doing to the trust that you're seeking to build in the community? And have you written to ICE and asked them not to do that?
So yeah, this has come up before, but I think that there's very nuanced versions of this, because what you just relayed to me has come up, and when we looked at it, I can tell you definitively as I sit here today, we have not had one verified incident of ICE immigration officers utilizing NYPD. And that's a subtle distinction, saying police versus NYPD. We cannot stop them from saying police. If it was NYPD, it would be a different matter entirely. And that's unfortunately the law. I mean, Terry, you were part of those discussions as well.
They can wear their federal police, so they can wear a jacket that says police. They cannot wear anything that says NYPD. They cannot knock on a door and say they're NYPD. They can't say they're the local police, they're federal police, so they have their ICE jackets, and they do have them that say police on it.
And nor would we allow them to wear anything or identify themselves as NYPD, because, again, for all the reasons that you just said.
Yeah. The word police in the minds and ears of so many people means you guys sitting here, the people that they turn to when they're hurt or when they need help.
And one thing that we could do is utilize the on-the-ground organizations to share the information that Chief Monahan just shared, is to let them know that unless it's NYPD, it's different from the term police. And that's part of that, some of that education that we're going to reach out to some of our immigration advocates. And since you shared that story, we're going to reach out and get that information out to people, that there's a difference between the two.
And we've tried to be proactive. If we have to be more, we can be more in terms of putting out on social media, in terms of internal and external messaging. I've spoken about it at public press events, that the NYPD does not conduct civil enforcement in terms of immigration. We are not in that business, nor do we intend to get into that business.
Oh, Inspector Shea, I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. We close it. Thank you so much for coming out, everyone. We appreciate you coming out.